Welcome back, everybody. In this video, we're going to discuss JavaScript APIs. We'll start with a basic introduction to what an API is, in case you're not familiar, and then we'll build and code out an actual API, both sides, the way that we would provide an API and the way that we would consume an API. So first things first, let's start with the question, what is an API? If you're like me and you have a question, you go to Google and get the answer. And of course, after you read this initial explanation, complete with an incomplete sentence, you might still have some questions about what exactly an API is, especially if you're just dealing with it in the context of JavaScript. So let me put it to you this way. The big thing that we'll hone in on in this discussion is the interface part of the API. So if you have an iPhone, let me just hide this down here. You're familiar with the visual, the graphical interface that you interact with regularly. So you might see an icon, and when you click on it, you know that it opens an app and different things happen under the hood, but all you know that you have to do is just push a button and everything happens. Well, you don't need to know that, for example, behind the scenes, there's all these different functions that are occurring and then eventually working its way to the event loop and these other implementation details. You don't need to know about that because this is the one thing that you have to do. That is your interface. The user tapping on the icon is the simple button that you push to get everything started. And that's what an interface gives you. It gives you a way to hook in, to grab and utilize something that's much more complex in a very easily consumable way. So let's see, if we go just to Google, and then we open up the DevTools, so let's first look at the elements on the page. So we've got a div here with an ID of PRPD. So if we go over to the console, we clear it out because it always has all that crap. The DOM, the document object model, has provided us with an API. And that API includes the object document and the method getElementById. Oops. By ID. There we go. And we just saw that there was one called PRPD. Oops. PRPD. There we go. And then if we call that method, then we get the element back. We don't have to manually do anything to navigate the DOM. We don't have to traverse it in any complex way. We are given a simple push to start little button that you can think of as the same as your iPhone button, where you don't have to understand how the iPhone works. I don't have to understand how getElementById works. I just hook onto that DOM API function or method, and it gives me back the output based on the input that I gave it. And so that's all that, at least in the context of basic API development consumption in JavaScript, that's all you really need to know. And of course, if you are instead doing JavaScript on the back end, there's Node. This is what we're going to be getting to. This is our consuming our API. But if you're used to Node, you might be used to something like FS, and then you'll require that in. And then FS, instead of document, would be your object. And then maybe something like writeFile would be your method. So you are given the object that you can access the API calls on, and then writeFile is the method that you're given. So this, you don't have to know about how writeFile is implemented. You just call it and it works because it's got all the implementation details hidden away behind the scenes. So if that's all an API is, then let's get started on building a very basic API. And as you can see, we're going to call it maths, and this is how we're going to consume it. We want maths to have a sum method, a difference method, a product method, and a quotient method. So for now, if we were to run any of these, maths is not returning us a API. So we have to actually create that API, and we're going to do it at the maths module. So let's just head over there to maths. And this is what we have so far. So this is our module. We're going to need to create a module.exports, and that's going to be our public API. Anything else that we put away that's not on the .exports object is not going to be included in our API. So let's get started with a sum method. So we'll create a function. We'll call it sum. We'll take a number and a second number. And this is just going to be super basic. We'll just return num1 plus num2, right? So that's all you need to create a sum function. We won't worry too much just because this is the purpose of the learning the API, not of completeness. We'll just assume that you're only going to pass in 2 numbers at all times. Now, this is how you actually expose sum to the rest of your program so that it can be consumed. So every time I mentioned that we were going to have an object, so we'll create our API object, and then we'll put the sum function on the .exports property, and then we'll be able to use it in our other program, or the other part of our program. So we'll switch back to app.js, and now if we remove the console log and we run node app, math of difference. Oh, right, it's going to throw errors because none of those are actually declared yet. So let's do one of these guys. Like that. And we'll do this one at a time, or at least the first one individually, and then I'm sure you can probably guess where this is going to go. So now we have 5. And so this is usually the end that you're looking at. You're consuming the API. You were going to require it in, call it something, and you don't see how sum works. Sum could be super weird and complex. Obviously, we could assume how you could make a sum function because we just saw it. But if this was something that was much more involved, if it involved making, say, HTTP requests, and it was called fetch, and you were going to use the fetch API, then you would require in fetch. And then if you're familiar with fetch from the DOM, it would be something like fetch. You put in your URL and your parameters, and then it gives you back a promise. So then you're able to call .then on your returned promise. So that is another example of an API. And it sounds complicated at first until you realize that this is all you really need to think of an API as being. It's just an object with some methods that abstract away a lot of complexity. So let's switch back then to our maths.js. Oh, I gotta write this first. And we'll finish writing out the rest of our methods. So let's go here, paste that guy, paste that guy, oops. All right, so we'll have one here. This guy was difference. This guy was product. And let's do this. And quotients. I'll be honest, I had to look up quotient. I did not remember it. Those. And now we'll add the rest of these to our public API. So we'll use sum, difference, product, and quotients. So now we can go back to app, remove these guys from being commented out. And now we're going to have access to all of those methods in our API. There we go. There are our results. Now, if you're familiar with ES 2015, more commonly known as ES6, you'll know that there's actually a way that we can make this more easily consumed and better for readability, especially if, for example, maths had 2,000 methods or something bizarre on it, and we didn't want to import the entire thing. We can actually do, this instead. So if we just create a object here, move this guy, oops. Let's say we only wanted to import sum and difference. We can then remove maths from every one of these guys. Let's do it this way. And of course, these guys won't be working. So now, if we only wanted to consume part of our API, the sum and the difference functions, oh, and that's going to throw an error because there's too many Fs. Node app. Now you still get the correct response, but all we had to do was import a couple things. This is called destructuring. And if you noticed when I went and exported these methods in the module.exports object, I didn't do it something like sum. I didn't do that because if they're named the same thing in ES 2015, you can simply put those in as one variable, and it assumes the name and the key and the value are the same and gives you back that pair in a much more readable fashion. So this is a great way that you'll see people consume APIs that are very large, or libraries if you're importing them. You'll see a lot of the times in, for example, React, if someone's importing parts of React, they don't need the entire module, they don't need the entire library, the entire API. They don't need to just import Node, or sorry, not Node, import React. They just might need a particular method or certain functionality from the API, so they'll just import that part. So that's how you can make a basic API, guys. Let's go back to the actual API just so you can have another look at it. It's called maths. And you have to write first, of course. If I could actually code while talking, it would be nice. Vim maths.js. There we go. All right, and so all you're going to be doing when you create a API inside of a particular project is create your methods, create your functions, create all your objects that you need, and then whatever you want to make public, you will just put on the export object so you can consume it elsewhere. And if you're thinking about how you are consuming an API, it's not something that's big and complex and that you can't figure out. It's actually pretty simple. So I hope that answered some questions. Sorry I got a little rambly there. Also, let me know how this font size was. I got a piece of feedback in one of my recent videos that it was too hard to read, so I upped the size. Kind of feels like I'm coding Little Tykes JavaScript, but oh well, if it's easier to read, it's better. It's easier to read. So if the video helps, leave a comment below letting me know, and or just like the video. I'd love to hear what you guys would like to learn more about, and I'll see you in the next one. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.